All right, our topic here today is building true family wealth. So, Jill, Craig, thank you so much for joining the discussion today. This is a topic that comes up all the time with our clients. We have folks that think of their wealth in lots of different ways. For some people, it's more about their balance sheet. For some people, it extends far beyond that. But at the same time, while they want wealth to be this powerful tool that unites their family and creates all these great experiences, oftentimes we hear more that it is a dividing element in their family, causing fear, anxiety. I don't want my wealth to ruin my family. I don't want to leave a mess. I don't want my family to squander what I've built. Like, there's a variety of different fears that come along with this. So I wanted to bring the two of you together because each of you has very relevant personal and professional experience about this topic. You've both thought very carefully about how families can use their wealth to their money to build true family wealth. So what I'm hoping is that each of you might just take a minute to introduce yourself, talk about your experience, and talk about why this topic's important to you. Craig, maybe you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
Sure, I'd love to. Awesome, thanks. I'm excited for this conversation as well. I think it's an area that, as you said, really matters to a lot of people. So my own personal experience, I started out working with high net worth families at a trust department at a bank. And then most of my career was with the Russell family and worked with the main company for 10 years and some of their high net worth investors. And then I worked with the family for 10 years. And that was with three generations of the family. The founder, and then the next generation, and the grandkids, and all of that was super fun. But it's also really like important to be able to help people journey with their wealth. It's a lot more difficult than we think. A lot of us think we wish we had it, but it's hard work, and so it's fun to get to walk with those folks.
For anybody who's curious, that the Russell family, that's if you've ever heard of Russell Investments or the
Yeah.
Russell 1000 or 2000 or benchmarks like that, that's the family behind that name. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Craig. Jill, maybe you can give us a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation as well. For the last 3.5 years, I've been working for the Laird Norton family, who are the owners of the Laird Norton Company. And this name is not necessarily familiar to a lot of people, but I actually am a family member. I married into this family in 1991. I'm a fifth generation family member. This family has its roots in lumber back in the Midwest, beginning in 1855. We partnered with the Weyerhaeuser family to purchase a lot of land in the Pacific Northwest. This Laird Norton Company migrated to the Pacific Northwest. So this is still a functional business owning high net worth family. However, we now have eighth generation family members. We have 540 family members, and I work for the family in family governance. So we pay very close attention to our resilience as a family and the types of education and programs that will enhance that. Resilience is my job. I'm also a board member of the Laird Norton Company, and I have quite a bit of experience in philanthropy. I've been a Medina Foundation board member and the president of that foundation for over 12 years, and I also serve on the board of the Laird Norton Family Foundation. So that's my background. And I've through this role, I've been able to connect with a lot of other high net worth families who also struggle with some of the same things we do in terms of generational wealth.
And well, you can tell me if this is accurate. It seems like wealth and families, whether it's billions of dollars or thousands of dollars, they're going to struggle with some of the same core questions about values, money, and how to align those handful of things.
Yeah, it does seem that way. It seems like most of the people I talk to have had the same conversations internally.
Well, so if our topic today is how to build true family wealth, and each of you, Craig, you working with a family through 3 or 4 generations, and Jill, you saying you're fifth generation and now working through to the eighth generation, that's a pretty impressive bank of experience. So out of that experience, how would each of you, maybe each of you could take a swing at defining what true family wealth is? Maybe Jill, do you mind starting off on that question?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it'd be easy to start with the kind of the balance sheet aspect, and of course, that's one of the things we're talking about. But I would say that one of the things that strikes me as true, and the longer I live, the more true I think it is that having a healthy family system which is much more of a psychological principle. Its ability to inform and maintain relationships is at the center of true family wealth, because unfortunately, this is not a vice versa sort of thing. Like if you have those healthy relationships, and if you have a functional family system, the ability to move forward with purpose and move forward with vision often takes care of itself, and wealth often follows. Unfortunately, I don't think it can be said the same that inheriting wealth is likely to produce a healthy family system. So I think it's that interplay of relational excellence, which often is the result of vision and intention. I don't think that's something that just happens. So if people have relational excellence and ability to develop vision and intention and communicate those things, I think sometimes the wealth aspect takes care of itself.
Do you have a recommendation for like what's one simple step a family could take to start building a healthy family system?
Oh, that is, I think that one of the things that it's kind of a complex topic in and of itself, but it's the idea of differentiated leadership. So in an unhealthy family system, people's negative emotions draw people in, and everyone just kind of becomes subject to the same swirling vortex of dysfunction. So in order to have a healthy family system, you have to have at least one person, preferably more, that has a vision for what that system looks like, that then is unlikely to be sucked into the vortex, can stand back from it while still being relationally connected to the people in it, which is actually a very challenging thing to do, to kind of be in relationship with people who tend toward dysfunction while not being part of the dysfunction. But I think that that's kind of a principle that I've grasped onto. I'm not perfect at this, but it certainly helps me, in my job. So I would say, like we often pay way too much attention to, like in my job, we have budgets, we have balance sheets. I have to pay attention to those things, but then ignore them at home. That seems like a sort of a silly way to function. So maybe pay attention to the same things in home life that you would pay attention to in work life.
That makes so much sense because I mean, one of the first things that people will tell you about having a thriving business is you should have a clear and compelling vision for where you want to go because it simplifies everything. So why wouldn't you apply that to the family? That's excellent advice. Craig, how might you define the pursuit of true family wealth? What's true family wealth from your experience?
Yeah, I wanted to build on what Jill was just saying, because I think it's way more than the amount of money that you have. It's got to be things that are beyond that, and kind of to her point, like one of the word I like to use is like it can be kryptonite, right? It can just be a thing that sucks all the energy out of a family. So you need to be able to say it's more than money. It's something. It's going to be experience, and I would totally agree and echo Jill's comment on you need to find somebody that can kind of be the drawing together person in the family in order to help them get that. Because whatever generation you're talking about, an article I have in one of my files from the Wall Street Journal, it says, how much money do you need to be content? And everybody says a little more than they have. And it doesn't matter how much they have. They could have 25 and they need 35. They could have 5 million and then they think they need 10 million. So it's got to be recognizing that it's more than money.
Yeah. Well, and Craig, I know something you wrote an article on our blog about different states that you can retire in. And people had questions about which state has the lowest estate tax or income tax or things like that. And your sneaky punch at the end is it's contentment. The state of contentment is the best state you could retire in. And that's a comment you've made. People watching this could probably tell from our Zoom titles that Craig, you and I work together. And so you've had occasions to share this on many occasions that contentment is going to precede wealth, that a person who doesn't tend to be content beforehand, once they get wealth, they don't tend to just magically become content. And Jill, that's similar to what you were sharing as well. The healthy family system doesn't come out of the wealth, but it can help wealth be used to thrive. That's excellent. So with a vision that's possible like that, why do you think wealth it seems like tends to divide family. You hear statistics like, 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation, 90% by the third generation. You hear anecdotal stories that seem just only to confirm that. Why does wealth tend to divide families?
I mean, we in family business we use a phrase that's it's passed around a lot. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves within 3 generations, and the concept there being the first generation has to roll up their sleeves and work really hard. And they typically have a reason for working hard. It's because of what they want to accomplish, and it has to do with who they are, what their character is, and what they think they have to contribute to the world. And then the second generation has the wealth, and they've grown up with expectations. Expectations are usually the destroyer of vision and intention. And so expectations of maintaining the wealth or having the same lifestyle that they grew up with sort of drive that ship, but it doesn't necessarily move the ball forward. So then the third generation is back to the drawing board, rolling up the sleeves and having to work hard to create something, or maybe recreate what was sort of not maintained before then. And I don't think this always holds true. Certainly, as part of a family that has 8th generation family members in it, I would have to say that I've seen examples, at least one, many more actually, where that doesn't hold true. Where people, but I think what happens there is that what is maintained is an ability to change. Charles Darwin may have gotten a few things wrong, but one thing he got right is that ability to change is absolutely central to the survival of any organism, whether it's a species or it's a business or a family or wealth. And I think that being able to change reflects character, and it reflects not a reliance on expectations, but a reliance on vision, a reliance on intention, ability to have will and to carry that forward. So I think that the reason wealth divides people is because the wealth is passed down without the vision, and the way visions are transferred to the next generation is not as obvious as the way wealth is transferred to the next generation.
Yeah, that resonates with a story that a client told me where grandparents made the money, passed it to parents, but just said this. I basically want to control everything you do with this, so they left the series of trusts. And they said they grew up thinking what an ironic name that was for that tool, a trust, because they said it was pretty clear where the trust was. It wasn't with the family, it was with this, this legal document. And of course, there's like excellent ways to use trust, but I think what it reflected was that the people who made the money and left the money had not passed along a vision for what to accomplish with it, and instead said, here's a series of legal hoops you have to jump through in order to access any of this.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen within a company as well as within a family, and we're talking about families here. But I think Arthur Andersen is kind of the classic example of somebody who had just rock solid integrity. In I think 1913 or whenever, almost 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago now, when he started his company and had the idea of public responsibility as the driving motivation. But by 2003, Enron, et cetera, like the whole thing collapsed in on itself. And I think that, again, it's initially that vision was carried forward, but then it became about the money. And the same thing can happen in a family if it becomes about the money instead of about the intention and maintaining the vision and the intention, even if that vision and intention needs to change, if it's central, I think that is the driving force, for actual successful wealth transfer.
Craig, what would you add to that? Why do you think, in your experience, wealth tends to divide families, at least statistically, it seems?
Yeah, I would agree with what Jill said. I think there's you think of how we have all learned things ourselves, right? We've learned things by having to take responsibility and having to do things. And if we're given something without any responsibility tied to it, then it's really hard. It's really hard to actually have, like, the generation that created the wealth probably went through some hardship, probably went through some struggles, probably went through some really hard stuff. And they set up the next generation to not have to do that. And then they don't learn anything because they haven't actually had to go through any pain. So I think it's I would just echo kind of what's already been said. the desire is good, but actually people having to have experiences and learn, there needs to be they have to have some skin in the game, and figuring out how to do that for generation 2 and generation 3 is a tricky thing.
Well, so, okay, branching off of that, here's a big, broad question that I'm sure could take tens of hours of discussion, but maybe simply, what are a few of the habits that each of you has observed in the families that you've worked with who have seemed to do a good job of this? What habits have you observed with these families that seem to have found a way to be united rather than divided by their wealth or through their wealth?
Yeah, I would go back to what we've already talked about. I would say they've figured out a way to learn to be content with what they have. And I would say, and we talked about this in the article, there's what, Jill thought, there's some meaning and purpose behind what they've done. So that would be my quick answer to that. And, Jill, you can elaborate or add some to that. But I think those things are super important foundations.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's having a focus on something outside of themselves. So they've habituated themselves to not just focusing on themselves. But I think that also, one of the things, and again, I think that I think that my husband and I in this way are probably more of a cautionary tale than we are an example of how to do things well. But I think the habit of being very careful about what you reward. For example, if a child, say, wants to play tennis, and what you reward is they win a match, right? And everybody's clapping and yay, and let's go out for, sodas or whatever after. Then you've rewarded the win as opposed to rewarding the kind of work that it takes to become a person who can win. And I think that can be applied to everything. And again, it's just a lot harder than reward. It's much easier to reward, oh, you got an A. Right. Wonderful. Let's celebrate that, as opposed to, I see you working really hard. This is the kind of work over time that will end up, and so to draw those connections, I think just habitually to draw those connections is something that we maybe picked up on a little later in our parenting journey than early, because it was just, again, it's much easier to do what's obvious than what's less obvious. But yep. I think that actually can be a habit that parents can, pick up on. And I think that even now I think about this even with my job, because we have a lot of reward systems built into our family governance. And to make sure that we are rewarding the thing we want to be rewarding, compensating the thing that we want to compensate, it's actually not as obvious as it might sound. So,
yeah.
Have you seen, is there an example that comes to mind? And if not, it's totally fine, of an idea or something you've seen a family do early on that has started incentivizing some of the right things? And if so, kind of what did they do, and what were the things they were trying to incentivize? The tennis example is a great cautionary tale. So yeah, what examples, if any, come to mind on that question?
So one that popped into my mind is when I was working at the main Russell company, we had a group called Russell Private Investments. So we work with ultra high net worth investors. And one of the families there, which was a great family, 3 generations that we were working with, they really early on, and we may get into more examples on this later, but they gave their kids pretty significant money to give away. And then the kids had to come to the family and present what it is that they wanted to give money away to. And so they learned pretty early, to kind of back to the purpose thing. The purpose in their family wasn't to have more and more money. The purpose was for them to be generous with some of that money. And once they did that, I think it was $20,000 that they were given to like teenage kids to give away. So that's a lot of money. But then they watched them to see how they did it and what they did, and the care that they did that with. And that's how they decided what they were going to do later on for giving more wealth to those kids. So that's the one that popped into my mind.
Yeah, I think we have a similar, kind of a maybe not quite so individual giving oriented, but we do with our family foundation, we do have a program within it we call the Sapling Fund. And this is just a way for us to incentivize our kids. And this is between the ages of 14 and 20. So the older youth, incentivize them to begin thinking early about giving. But we do it in a way that the incentive kind of for them is to get to be together, right? Because they really love to be together. And so if we bring them, you can come to the family summit and we'll have this special, room for you, and you'll get to be together and participate and learn how to function as a board and learn how to, you know, discuss things and make decisions together and vote. So we really do organize them as though they are a board in and of itself, like their own kind of functioning youth board. And I think that for them, they see this as both a college resume builder. So there's incentive to be participating in this because they understand, oh, actually there is something, kind of directly for me in giving away to others. So we kind of made it, it's like, hey, this is a great, we'll write a letter of recommendation for you regarding your work on the sapling fund. And, so it is kind of an interesting way to incentivize generosity.
Well, and you hit on something specific there that was it's not just incentivizing them individually, like you said, but it is to incentivize them to come together to learn how to navigate difficult decisions and a process and then agree on an outcome and a way to move forward. Right. Somebody, we were talking about family, creating a healthy family culture recently. And somebody said, then this stuck with me, one of the biggest lies that has been told to families is it's not about quantity time, it's about quality time. And it's not exactly a lie, but they said the miss there is that quality time only comes out of quantity time. So you have to spend enough time together to figure out what things are productive and fruitful for us and what things just kind of, we plant those seeds and they don't really sprout. And so we don't, keep doing those and we do these other things. Yeah. So in order to figure out what is quality time, you have to have spent enough time together to figure out what quality time even looks like for you. Yeah. So I hear some of that even in the examples you're talking about.
Yeah. In fact, I will say that I think one of the things I've noticed in my own kids is some of the experiences they had as a youth growing up with this Laird Norton family group and participating in these get-togethers is most of the things they still talk about were super irritating at the time. It's like, they were forced to camp outside in a javelina. We were in Arizona. A javelina comes running through their campsite and everybody was terrified because they actually are dangerous animals. And then they found a tarantula in their tent, or the cousin who insisted on having an entire half of the tent to herself, and the other 3 had to cram into the corner. It's those kinds of things, but those are actually the bonding things. It's funny how they look back on those, and that's kind of why they want to keep coming back, because you're building stories and you're building a sense of, identity with other people that has meaning for you over the long term.
And maybe even tied to that, your example of tennis incentives. I heard a story recently about a very like one of the most influential families in the world of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And he said, this guy who was talking about this family, he had some ancillary discussion, and then he was taught by maybe the grandson of this family. And he said, growing up, my dad would, when I lost a match, we would have a party, because what he wanted to incentivize was for me to try and fail, but to try hard and to try and apply the principles. And through that, every generation starts with answers to all of the hard-fought questions of the prior generation. And so incentivizing in this example of, quality time, quantity time, spending time together, doing things like that, it's almost as though what I want to incentivize in a family would be the effort to try to find something that bonds you and then doesn't end up doing that. Because you found something that you thought might work and it didn't work, so you cross that off the list and try the next thing. But if we could come together and celebrate the effort, you can bond around honestly finding something that we're like, oh, that was kind of weird. Maybe we won't do that one again.
And I think that, it's all interesting that coming back to the idea of expectations. And if people, if a family of means is always taking fancy vacations and constantly eating out at nice restaurants, then their children become people who have the expectation that, well, I am just a person who does take the family, and I am just a person who does eat at nice restaurants. So then anything outside of that experience, if they haven't taken the understanding of the parent saying the reason you're enjoying this fancy vacation is because I have worked really hard and I'm valuing these experiences with you. And it's going to be your job to do the same thing for your family. If you work really hard, then maybe, not necessarily, but maybe you will be able to also have this value for your family to spend time together in these ways. But I think it's so sad, I mean, I think I don't know, one difference that I've seen between people, and I could just use my husband and myself in this example, people who've grown up with means and people who haven't really, is for me, going out to a fancy meal is a delight. And I think something that should be rare. My husband doesn't really care for eating out at all because he can't really enjoy it. He doesn't have the ability to enjoy it because he's had so much of it.
Yeah, an interesting thing that's come up in discussion with families, from my perspective, who seem to have done this well, is they've done a good job, and feel free to weigh in on this kind of principle if anything occurs to you. They've found a way to do things without becoming people who do these things.
Yeah. There you go.
And so how do they do that? One consistent through line that I've seen is these are people who readily talk about their failures. And then they use those to try to help educate, coach, enrich the lives of others. And it seems to be indicative of somebody who is very other-oriented. If I'm very self-oriented, I'm not going to want you to know my failures. But if I'm very other-oriented, me sharing a failure with you might enrich your life so you don't have to experience that or make you not feel alone in a certain experience or something like that. So there seems to be a through line of some degree of humility or willingness to use and grow through failure.
Yeah, one of our core values at Russell was to celebrate mistakes, which just doesn't make sense, but it's exactly what we've just been talking about. It's like, that's how you learn, right? You celebrate those things. And to Jill's point, like you look back on those things and you have fun reflecting back on those times where, the kid that took the half of the tent and the other three, but they bond over that, right? And so it's kind of cool to be able to say we can celebrate mistakes. The other thing that popped into my mind, kind of an example thing, was as you were talking, Jill, about nice, like we had like in a 3-week period in our family, we went to a super, super nice, like 5-star hotel as a whole family and had a great time. And then we went straight from there to a camp that was probably 2-star-ish, and we still had a great time. And then one of our kids went to Mexico on a mission trip, and I said that was like -1 star-ish. And he had a great time, right? And so that's what you want, is you want each of those 3 experiences. He came back and go, man, they were all great. And I only want to do the super fancy. He didn't come back saying that at all. He says, I liked all 3 of those things. And it had to do with the community and the people he was a part of.
Because that's resilience. That's
right.
The definition of it right there.
Yep. Yeah. And you need that resilience to be able to view wealth as a tool to do something else, because you realize you are a person who can go through downs and ups and then use something as a tool to create another experience. That's great. Craig, you briefly alluded to this, but a lot of this discussion comes out of an article that the two of you collaborated on, which was awesome. It's same topic, how to build true family wealth. One of the things you talk about in there is families that seem to do a good job using wealth to unite their family rather than divide their family find out what is worthy to invest in. And so you give 3 categories of things that are worthy investments, things that help you grow, things that deliver positive experience, and things that are related to giving. So I was hoping maybe we could take a quick trip through each of those. You could say, here's what I would say is why something that's growth, experience, and giving is a worthy investment. And then just share a brief example of how that's looked in the families you've worked with or your personal family. Craig, maybe you want to start us off with the growth example.
Yeah, it's interesting because the one that came to mind, which is going to sound different, is actually, it was growing through, I would say, pain, right? So one of our kids, they were in college, and we helped fund college, but they had to come up with some of the money for themselves. And this particular child was making some decisions in college that were inconsistent with our family's values. And so we actually cut off paying for their room and board because they were making choices that we didn't feel like were right. And we had the conversation. It was a good conversation, but that was really a bit of a turning point for them, was to be able to go, okay, if I have to pay for this myself, I'm going to rethink how I'm doing it. So I don't think it was a strings attached thing, but it was hey, this isn't consistent with my family. And so I'm going to, and that actually led to a change. So Not the one that I thought would come to mind, but that's the one that popped into my mind, was actually an experience of pain that led to a really good decision on that person's part.
Interesting. Jill, what comes to mind for you when it comes to why investing in things that pursued growth? Why is that a worthy thing to invest in? And then what's a brief example maybe that comes to mind if one does?
Yeah, I think growth implies flexibility. It implies, being able to reposition yourself or reorient yourself to reality. And so I think that is important for, all of life, investing financially or otherwise. I think one example, which is not a personal one, but one thing that the Laird Norton family does is we pay for the summit for all family members. We're trying to kind of juggle the way we do this, and we're constantly kind of modifying, and not everybody comes. But this year, for example, it'll be in June, and we have 355 family members registered to come. So it's a lot of people, and it's an expensive program. And one of the things that our family council worked really hard on is doing like a vision exercise, like, why do we make this investment? What do we need to get from it? What are the jobs that this summit has to do to make this a worthwhile investment? And so we really were quickly able to delineate 4 things, like it needs to do these 4 things. And if it does these 4 things, then our family will be resilient, so it's worth investing in. And making sure we keep those 4 things like in the forefront, because it's awfully tempting. Like, we do have family members that will say, well, why don't we do it in Hawaii again? We did that in 2000 and whatever, and it was great, and we really like to go to the beach. Well, it's like, well, beach is not one of those 4 jobs done of the summit. Now, I like the beach as well as person, right? But if it doesn't make the list, then we have to think very seriously about, if we could find an adequate non-Hawaii venue that still has good food, reasonable space, and all of the things required, then perhaps that is the decision we make. And so keeping the focus on what is actually needed from it is really important, and kind of a part of the growth of our family, and saying, okay, we're going to not go to the beach because that's not why we do this.
Something interesting is in each of your examples, nobody mentioned anything about investing in a stock that grows or a bond that provides income or things like that. And what's interesting about that is both of you have done that. You've facilitated and worked in families where a primary objective is actually to invest in things that financially grow. And so it's almost a table stakes that, yes, we're doing that, but why? And then you share stories about how the wealth, maybe profits from wise financial investments, have been used to create growth. And then maybe, Jill, you've used growth and resilience together as kind of a pair, almost as though like resilience is a result of growth. That these are really truly long-standing, worthy things to invest in people, which is interesting. So the next thing that you talk about is experience. Talk about what does investing in experience look like, and maybe one of you could share an example there.
I can go. I think of that. That's an area for us and our family that is a super high priority, right? And I think would be true for the families of wealth, right? To be able to do that, to say, how can we do life-giving experiences together? And so the example that came to mind for us is we actually did a big family trip. Our kids would say we were pretty cheap or frugal, but we did some pretty good big family trips. And we did one to Israel, I think in 2005. And all 4 of our kids went. We also took 3 other families that just didn't have the means to do that. And so we funded them going, but they were significant families in our kids' lives and in our lives. And so then we were able to have that experience together with all of them in a way that never would have happened had we not done that. And so we felt like to get experience at different parts of the world, so that was like a more fancy. We've done a mission one as a family too, but that one in particular was one that, and one of our kids wasn't even going to go because they were in school, but they're like, I want to go, I want to be part of it. So it was like, and they look back now and go, those kind of experiences are things that really impacted them and impacted us as a family. So finding those things, an experience that's outside of your norm, that's giving you exposure to different parts of the world or different things, that for us was huge. So we try to continue to do that.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a priority for us, kind of along the way at different times, maybe not consistently. And one thing that I noticed really early on, when our kids were still pretty young, was that they were having fun, or they would enjoy the experience if my husband and I were. It
Oh, yeah.
wasn't the other way around. And it's
Hmm.
so interesting because that really motivated. So my husband really, he knew I really wanted to go to London, and this was a priority for him, and to make sure, I got there at some point. And so, he told me what he really wanted me to do was plan a trip for our family during their spring break, to England, or to London. We just did London. And so I really oriented the trip toward me,
Hmm.
not for me, but because I knew that would be what they wanted to experience. They wanted to know why I wanted to go there,
Hmm.
and they wanted to know what interested me about it. And so, at first I felt kind of weird, like I'm going to really drag all my kids to the British Library to see the Jane Austen writing desk. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I will. And we had tea, and we did this walk where you see a lot of famous authors' homes or whatever. They had a fabulous time. Like, for them, that was what they wanted. They wanted to get to know me better through this trip, and to see kind of things through my eyes. And if I wasn't, they were all there. Your kids are looking at you. They're looking
Yeah.
at the experiences you're having, and they want to be a part of that. It's not really the other way around. It doesn't mean you can't go to Disneyland. I mean, I happen to really like Disneyland. It was an easy one for us, but
Yeah.
I do think that I actually kind of that didn't dawn on me until our youngest was about 5, and then I was
Hmm.
like, they're actually looking at us. Like, are mom and dad having fun? Because if not,
Yeah.
we're pretty, not interested in this either. Then.
Yeah.
Which
I
surprised
love
me.
that, Jill. And I think that probably planted a seed in at least a couple of your kids for their love
Right.
of literature, right? They
Oh,
did
yeah.
that as young. Now they
Mhm.
all love, I think they all love reading, or at least most of them do. And that was
Well,
probably a seed planted.
they can read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's so much helpful principle there, though. We talk with clients frequently who they're worried that their lack of preparation, whether or not they've prepared well or not, they're worried about their failures becoming costs to their children. So they'll leverage themselves or feel inclined to sacrifice lots and lots of things, and really kind of family harmony, happiness, in order to provide the money for a kid to be able to experience something. And in fact, according to what both of you are saying, which I think we've seen this to be true as well, kids are really just looking to their parents to see how they should feel about a topic.
Right.
If mom and dad seem to be able to have an enjoyable time at a 1-star or a 5-star location, then I should be able to do that.
Yeah.
But if they felt like their happiness or their satisfaction was tuned to, well, this year we could only do this, but next year we might be able to do this,
Right.
they'll
Well, and
probably
that
take some of
really,
that on
that goes
too.
back to that tennis playing
Yes,
example.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, that's right.
again, like, it's like, okay, they're watching us, they're watching our reaction, and
Yeah.
they go, okay, so clearly what matters is
Yeah.
winning. And so that's where it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
didn't really know how much they were watching me at that
Well,
point.
and you might even be, so you're putting your finger on a helpful principle there, which is, how do I incentivize something? Well, I lead by example in it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not even like creating the reward system. That's helpful as well, but they're not going to be incentivized by something that I'm not acting incentivized by.
Yeah.
Yeah. To some degree, each of you've touched on this already. So maybe let's do one brief example from each of you about why giving is a worthy investment. What does it look like to invest in giving, and what's a brief example of that? I know in just talking with each of you individually, you've shared that it seems there's something about giving that when wealth passes through somebody to somebody who's truly in need, you multiply the effect of your wealth because you enjoy and you find fulfillment in meeting the needs of other people that you get to see face to face. And so for a lot of folks, what they experience when they give seems to be something like, I didn't know that I needed something by giving my money to somebody in need. I didn't know that I had a lack, which was I need to experience helping somebody who has a need and using something of myself to help fill that need. And that just amplifies the joy in their life. So maybe if you don't mind sharing a quick example there, and then maybe we'll wrap with some advice for families thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back. Jill said this early on. It's like the whole idea of giving is thinking of others, not just yourself. And people that have wealth can get focused on what they have as opposed to thinking about others. And so giving is, I think, probably the best way to think outside of yourself. And so quick example for us. And then in the article, we talk about giving money to our 4 and 5-year-old grandkids and letting them kind of choose, which sounds really young, but then they actually went to a coffee shop, got little pay it forward things, and they spent 2 hours watching people continue to pay forward. And that just planted a really cool seed in their lives that they'll never forget. I mean, that's going to be part of who they are. And we gave it to them at Thanksgiving, and then tell us the story at Christmas. And we've done that with each generation. Now we do that with our kids. We give them money at Thanksgiving and say, tell us that stories about that at Christmas. And we know other families that have done that. So that would be my example there.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that giving has been an important part of our lives in a variety of ways. Although with our kids, I think my favorite things that we did were actual like service opportunities where we were, going under the bridge and handing out, things to homeless people, not because we were really helping them, but because it helped my kids brush up against people that were in different circumstances. But I think for me, I grew up with a dad that had very holistic view of money, like really helping us to understand even as kids that it's not money that's evil, it's the love of money and understanding what that leads to. And he would always say, and this is something that it's kind of funny because now, I'm on the board of 2 philanthropies, but he would always say, spending $1 or paying someone with $1 or giving away $1, it's all the same. I mean, it all helps people, like to not feel like it's bad to pay people their salary, or to not feel like it's bad to leave a tip, or to not feel like it's like if there's virtue in, as opposed to thinking that there's virtue here and not virtue there. But I think at the end of the day, it's what kind of person you want to become. And I think giving plays a unique role in feeling that we're not helping us understand that we're not in charge of the world.
Yeah.
That's a great
word. That's great. Well, so to draw our conversation to a close, I want to pose 2 questions and just kind of answer both of them, one of them, however you'd like to. What advice might you give to a family who either wants to start out carefully thinking about this or finds themselves wishing they would have started earlier? I feel like wealth has already kind of been this divisive factor in my family, and I just don't know what to do from here. What advice would you give to one of those 2 families, to both of them? Maybe one piece of advice carries through to both of them. So maybe just let's chat about that for just a few minutes here, and then we'll draw things to a close.
You want to take a crack first, Jill?
I mean, I think, I always hesitate to give advice because I feel like the underlying assumption with advice is that I've done things well. I don't think that's the case, but when I look around me and I see people who have, I think one of the things that I notice is that they're intentional. So developing character, understanding that at the heart of a human being is will and intention, and making sure that you don't apply that only to what your investment strategy is, but what your strategy toward life is. And I think that the family is the easiest thing to overlook in life sometimes, because kids show up as newborns and they don't need a lot. You're not directing them much. And then, you're just feeding them and changing diapers and then repeat. And then at one point that shifts. And I think as parents, it's kind of easy to miss it, or maybe even as grandparents. And so to make sure to think through being an intentional person in all aspects of life, not just the ones where you have to because it comes with a salary or that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, that's really good. I love your word resilient. And so the 2 words that keep coming back to me is resilient and contentment. Those are 2 things that are really important for families to figure out. And so, but to your question, Josh, I would say, 1, don't be too hard on yourself. If you have, no family's done it perfect. Neither of ours have done it perfect. The ones we work with haven't done it perfect. So don't be too hard on yourself, and find other examples that are maybe a step or 2 ahead of you that you can look to and ask them and learn from them. Look for those examples, and then just celebrate those things that you've done well. It's okay to learn from the mistakes, but then celebrate things you've done well and make little steps. You don't have to be perfect. You can make little steps along the way and hopefully enjoy that journey.
Yeah, there's a story that comes to mind about this is somebody who works in the finance world, helps advise families on how to pass wealth through multiple generations and do it successfully. And he had somebody that came to him and said, I want you to help me design these various financial instruments so I can put my wealth into them so that it'll restrict access for my, kids and grandkids, because I don't want them to feel like they're, trust fund babies. And I don't want them to just kind of grow up with a silver spoon in their mouth and not understand what hard work means. And this person I thought it was excellent advice. It was, if you're open to this, first of all, you have to be open to this, but if you're open to this idea, I will 100% do all of those things for you in a year.
Oh.
Between now and then, let's put some basic things in place to make sure there's legal passing of wealth. You have a will and you have some, the basic provisions in place. But the people that you're concerned about the wealth kind of being a corrosive factor for them, go to lunch or coffee with them once a month for the whole year.
Hmm.
It might have been once a week. Craig, I think you know this story as well. It was something like this on a regular cadence, and start communicating, getting to know these people and communicating with them what's important to you, what you hope will happen, what's your vision, not just what you hope doesn't happen. What do you hope does happen with the wealth that you're ultimately going to leave behind? Because we know you're not going to take it with you. And what was fascinating was he said after that time period had passed and they reconvened and said, okay, are you ready to get all these things started? His mind had changed. And he said, after getting to know these people and starting to build a bridge of vision, I actually want to give them more flexibility, not less flexibility, because I feel like I've been convinced that they're people that will do great things. And now I just want to kind of let them do these great things. So something that comes to mind in terms of what's a habit that a family could look to implement. Jill, you hit this right on the head from the start, which is building connections and healthy family systems, whether that's lines of communication or leadership structures or things like that. Well, this has been a super fruitful discussion. I'm so grateful to both of you for sharing your experience, your time, and what have been some excellent observations. So with that, we will link to the article that both of you collaborated on. And for anybody watching, if you've got other questions you think that would be helpful for us to discuss in future discussions like this, or these are things you're trying to carefully think through, feel free to reach out. But until then, Craig, Jill, thank you both so much for your time.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks, Josh.